Cool. So we have successfully used environment variables. And just to recap, we are using the Python .env package that we've installed, and it gives us this great function .env values that looks at our .env file. And it is important to note, I don't think you want spaces. I'm not sure if they do anything, but generally they're best avoided in these .env files. And it turns into a Python dictionary. And then just like with any other Python module, even though we haven't really done this a lot, what we can do is in our views where we use our environment variables, and there it is, it's hiding from me. We can import that dictionary from our settings module. And then go ahead and use them here. And now they're not hard-coded. And then the other piece that we saw that is really important is I need to create a .getignore file and put .env in there so that the environment variable file .env never gets checked into Git, into version control. And I also highly recommend making a .env example file. It certainly will be a positive signal for anyone looking at your portfolio, and this is a great way of documenting for other developers what environment variables this program needs, and is a relatively common practice. So I've got this endpoint. And I'll just open up a new tab, in fact, that we've written now. So my Django API has API/v1 now. Under the hood, we're talking to the Noun project third-party API and sending all this stuff back. I don't necessarily want or need all this stuff. And it's pretty common in working with third-party APIs where once you get that data, let's just grab the bits we care about. And that's what we're going to return to the client. And to do this successfully, you need an easy way to explore the shape of the data returned, because as you all are seeing, APIs tend to return pretty huge JSON objects or arrays of JSON objects and things like that. So obviously one really good way to look at the structure of this is with Django REST framework and in the browser, just like we are right now, because we can see really nicely with formatting and stuff like this, what this response type looks like. The Noun API documentation is also good. Not every API will have documentation nearly as nice as this, so it's important not to rely on it, but it is good to always check. And this documentation is actually pretty nice. Like this part here, there's not so much, but in the Explorer is where we really get good data, right? Where I pasted my API key in here earlier and stuff, and we could type something in, hit try it out, and we see the shape of that set back. In the really good APIs, what there also is basically a reference. And they do indeed have it here for each endpoint, where they show us an example request and they show us an example response. And this is a really good way to see the shape of the data too. Like we probably don't care about generated, but we do care about what's here under icon. And there's like a bunch of different stuff, it looks like, and often there might be multiple icons, right? And then the other way that we can do this is with Python's Pretty Print, which is a nice built-in library that comes with Python. And I just very quickly want to kind of show that in action as well. So let me go ahead and close out a couple things we don't need here. and pop back to our views file. And so this is not like a critical piece to make things work, but this is another tool that you can use to like explore data from third-party APIs a bit more easily. So this is a built-in Python library called PrettyPrint. And I can use it like this. I need to do a little bit of configuration. And you can look at the docs. Again, I think this is also where like the VS Code auto hints are quite nice. But we can give like the level of indentation, how many levels deep inside that JSON we want to travel. And we can give both of these things here, really, is how much we want to indent and how many levels deep we want to go. And now I can use my printer. And so now if I want to, I can, let me clear the console so we get good data here. Hit my endpoint. And here I can get, say, just 2 levels deep, printed out and printed out pretty nicely to work with this. And for now, at least, like, you know, we could, if we wanted to, just return, because the bit we care about here, by the way, is, I jumped the gun because I kind of went a little too far. But we've got thumbnail URL here. We've also got icon URL here. And we probably want the full icon URL. So if we wanted to, like, to give a really simple endpoint for our React frontend to use, we could just send back the icon URL for now. You know, we can, as we get into the question of getting like multiple possible icons back, we can cross that bridge of do we send them all or do we just pick one? But just to get the ball rolling, and I don't know how that snuck in there. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm putting those in the wrong place. That's how that snuck in there. Right, because this response JSON object is a dictionary. And now if I hit this endpoint, I just get back this icon URL, which is going to be really easy for my front end to consume. And in fact, what I would recommend doing is, though it feels like an extra layer, I think the pattern of always putting the data that we care about under a property named data in our return JSON is kind of nice. And then if every single endpoint you interact with always puts the important stuff in response.data, I think that's actually a pretty nice consistent pattern for your front end code. And it means that as time goes on, if we have important metadata or things we can add in here as well. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating another dictionary, and this response class is going to know to just turn this whole thing into JSON. And if I hit this now, I get a JSON object back with a property data with my noun product URL in there. And this gives me a really nice pattern for my front end code. You don't have to do it that way. I do I've come to appreciate that. So I just wanted to demo that a bit and talking through that a bit. Let me go ahead and open out the breakout rooms, and those of you that just want to dive into the assignment, feel more than free. I'm going to move into, we are going to create some Pokemon types like rock Pokemon, fire Pokemon. I'm not the Pokemon guy, as you all know, but I can infer that they have many types. And we're going to add this to our Pokemon model. We might throw in a validator. And then we're going to use the noun project to get icons for our different Pokemon types. And then we're going to write some React code so we can actually, you know, show this data in a nice way in our front end application. Okay, Breakout rooms are open. Again, feel more than free to dive into the assignment, and I'm just going to keep on rolling. And actually, this is a great time to pause and just see if folks have any questions.
Hey Adam, would you be able to help me with some the authentication issues?
Yeah, let's take a quick look. If there's not a quick fix or I can't see a quick fix, we might have to come back to it after class. But yeah, let's take a look because my guess is this will be useful for other people to see as well.
All right. So my keys are working on the website because I've used them on the website itself with the little API Discover tool. So when I try to run this, I get this 403 client error, forbidden for URL, which I'm assuming has to do with the authentication. But yeah,
That would make sense. I think it probably does have to do with the authentication. I was actually just helping someone else with a similar issue, and let's see, you've got api.thenounproject/.com/v2. So that looks like the right endpoint there. I would say you've got your API. Okay, you've got your auth keys hard coded. We're trying to hit the endpoints. I'm actually not familiar. What does raise for status do on that response there?
I think it's just I got this from Chat GPT. It's just raising an error code. If I don't get the proper one, like so it just will come down to here to this accept block and print this error. So I'm just printing off this request error as the error I'm getting. I
Got
can
it.
take all this out. I just like I said, I was using Chat GPT to try and figure it out. But even when I directly copied the curriculum and had the correct endpoint and I knew my keys were correct, I was still getting the wrong, like, it was still getting a 403 error.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I ran into this yesterday, and then when another student ran into it, our issue was we had the URL wrong. Like I think I had forgotten the v2 at one point. This looks right though. What we could also try doing is directly copying and pasting the key val and secret values from your code into that API Explorer. I was knocking, pasting like key vals into their API Explorer there, but it's actually a great way to validate that these keys do indeed work and that like we didn't make some sort of weird typo in putting them in our code. So that's worth giving a shot, which you're doing now, which is awesome. You probably just want to make sure to put them both in the API key and the secret.
I did. I
Oh,
copied
okay,
and pasted
perfect.
them both over.
And then is
And yeah,
that one working?
this is working on the website. So I just did the query for dog and it pulled up a response code 200. But
Yeah,
then, like I
interesting.
said, when I try and do this same thing here, and then I hit refresh, and then I'm getting this 403 request error 403 client thing.
I am honestly not sure. Let's come back to this at the end of the lecture because I agree it looks like it should work. It is almost definitely going to be something escaping both of our eyes related to like the URL being wrong or like a small syntax or typo issue. Because if those API keys work, then those are good, and the rest of that code looks pretty good. It might be worth actually getting rid of the try except to see like the full unvarnished error message when Django crashes and dies. Because I know depending on what we put in the accept there, though it sounds like we're getting most of the information. Um, yeah, I'm not quite sure what's going on there either, but it looks good. Are you using HTTPS in the URL? I think you were.
Yes.
Okay. let's come back to it at the end of the class. I apologize. I can't spot an issue at the moment. So it's almost definitely going to end up being something simple. And if you do end up figuring out what it is, just let us know. What I'll also do sometimes is if I absolutely can't find something, I'll comment out like a huge chunk of my code or just delete it and rewrite it line by line, because half the time there probably is some sort of typo type thing lurking in there. Because I think you're right that everything should be working. Yeah, I apologize. That I feel a little frustrated now because I want to like dig into it.
I've
But
been
check.
frustrated for the last 2 hours.
Okay, we'll definitely come back to that one. Remind me when we wrap up. What else is on people's minds, or what other questions do folks have?
Yeah, Adam, is there an easy way to pull this down, like the Pokédex project? Because I got pretty far behind on it. Then I started making some tweaks and reorganizing files and stuff. And yeah, now it's not working. So is there like a way, I don't know, like with the, would it be better to start from scratch and like create the database and go through all that, or just copy it down?
Yeah, that is a good question. And the good news is we do have like multiple versions of this Pokédex project. There's a couple places. So in the curriculum for each day, like for instance, if you look in the directory for today's lesson, there's a Pokédex directory, and that has the full project from the lesson. So I would probably use that, honestly, and I would copy that whole directory into wherever you do your work for the assignment and just build off of that. I mean, you don't even need it for the assignment. We actually, I think, want you to build a project from scratch, but there's a Pokédex or examples directory in each day's lesson.
Sweet.
Cool.
Thank you.
What else is on people's minds? Cool. All right. Let's keep rolling here. I think I'm gonna move through the back end stuff a bit quicker because I want to make sure to get to the front end stuff. So I apologize in advance, but I feel like the front end is where we're gonna get more, like the most value out of seeing it, integrating that. So parts of this I may move like a little more swiftly through. So where we want to end up here is I want to add a new property to our Pokemon model. Where I want to end up here is if I go to models py for my Pokemon, we have trainer, we have Pokedex, we have all these things. What I want to add is type, and I want it to be a char field. I want to give it a default value where a Pokemon has a normal type, but am I correct in understanding like the Pokemons have all sorts of interesting types? You know, I'm kind of looking at our lesson content and I see like fire, water, ghost, bug, electric, like a very rich range of different possible types. And so we want to be able to give that Pokemon a type. And since those are all nouns, we can use the noun project to find an icon for them. Does that sound about right in terms of the world of Pokemon and how they work? Cool. And since a Pokemon can only have so many types, we do want a validator here. There's a lot of different ways to deal with this data in our model, depending on, say, if we wanted non-technical users to be able to add new types. Maybe we want this to live in the database. We could also put this in like a constants file is another common approach. And then using a validator is another common approach as well. And it's all just sort of a question of trade-offs. So I need to write my Pokemon type validator, and that's going to be really our next step here. So I actually don't have any validators in my Pokemon app, but I do elsewhere. So I'm going to create the validator's py file for my Pokemon. I'm going to do a split, and on the right side here, I'm going to open up one of my other validators that I do have, and I'm going to use this as guide code. And we know we're going to want to use a validation error. And, you know, if you wanted, you could name this validate Pokemon type if you wanted to get a little more specific. I'm just going to stick with validate type. I feel like both are perfectly valid names. No pun intended. And we're going to pass in just use the term value, right, for the value or the type of the type. Really, I just want to avoid the word type in here. I don't think it's a Python Django special word, but you know, words like type, class, we want to be a little careful about. And also, to be honest, just as a pattern for validators, just using value all the time as this argument makes sense. And basically, I want a list of allowed types. And I'm just going to add a couple in here to get the ball going. I'm not going to list all possible Pokemon types because that would take a minute. I think I will just stop at like bug, ghost, and steel because that's a pretty cool combination. And we're going to add what's called a guard statement, which is an if statement that checks for our error case, for our unhappy path. Right? Over here in this other validator, I don't know if we would call it a guard, but it's the same idea. But we're actually looking for our happy path. And if we're happy, we return. If not, we raise an error. I actually kind of like the guard pattern because you can add in a bunch of if clauses for different error statements that aren't related. And it's very easy to modify your code. And that's going to look something like this. We need to convert to lowercase because we don't care about casing. And because Python is awesome, we can just use not in to check if this value is in allowed types or not. And if it's not, we do want to raise a validation error. And I'm going to use an F string and say invalid type. And it's really useful to provide information with error messages. As sort of Megan was seeing, like, really these error messages are super helpful to programmers. So let's give the list of valid types. And let me go ahead and get rid of that pop-up that was there. And we can do a little nifty sort of thing here where we'll put some code inside these angle brackets. And let me just put this on a new line as I write this out so we can kind of see it. And I'll put it all back on one line when I'm done. And Python has this great join method that we can use on any string. And it concatenates strings. And as you can see from the example all the way down here, the way it works is we call it on the delimiter, which in this case is a period, but for us will be a comma. And then we pass it a list of the other strings we want to concatenate. So this is going to give us a comma separated list of all our Pokemon types. And I have to say, this is one of the great things about a language like Python, as opposed to JavaScript, that just has a lot of these things built into the language for you. And that's really all we need with the validator. We don't actually need to return anything on our happy path. By default, a Python function will return none. And that's perfectly fine for a validator. And I apologize, I probably should have updated this as well at the time. Because I said something else and that maybe we need to return this, and that's not really the case. The most important thing a validator does is throw an error if there's a problem. But Django accepts both of these perfectly fine as valid validator functions. So now that I've written my validate type validator, I can go ahead and use it. And I just need to import it. And I just want to pause in and see if folks have any questions. Cool. So now that I've updated my model, I want to test this out but I don't want to like write a unit test. Any thoughts on like an easy way to test if my model and like validation and stuff is working? And it's a little bit of a trick question. Oh, go ahead, please.
I would say just run your server and put in the path.
We totally could. I have not even written a path yet, however. And I really want to test my model code now, because what if I made a typo or something and then I'm writing the paths and I end up like making more errors? What we can do, though you're absolutely right, that would be another way to test that as well. What I can also do is I can just use the Django console, right? I can run the Django console, I can create a Pokemon, and I can use that full clean validation method to see if my validation works or not and save stuff. So I can basically manually run my own little unit test. And now that I've updated my model, there is one thing that I have to do so that we can actually save stuff to the database. And can I just get a quick reminder of what that is?
Migrate.
Yeah, exactly. I need to, remember that the model really is meant to represent data that we get from the database, and Django uses the models to figure out what our database should look like, right? Django actually looks at the model to generate SQL, to create tables and columns and stuff in Postgres. So now that, for these fields, for these methods, it doesn't matter because this is not like the core fields, but whenever we're adding, something where we're doing models.char field or another field, we're updating our data model. And so I have to make migrations and apply them. And it would help if I did manage.py. And I'm going to use this dry run flag just so we can see. So it didn't actually make the migrations, but it's telling me what it's going to do. It's going to create a new migration file up here in my Pokemon app to add a field to the Pokemon type. So let's actually go ahead and make that migration. And lo and behold, there's the migration file. And now let's go ahead and run the migration, because what Django, we haven't actually changed Postgres yet. What Django does is it runs through all of these from one to the next, figures out if anything needs to be done, and it gets here, says, cool, I've taken care of all of these dependencies, all the other migrations. Oh, I have to add this field. Let me look at Postgres, and Django sort of tracks stuff a little bit and realizes, all right, I need to generate some SQL to create a new column on my Pokemon table for type. And again, if I do, I believe the flag is plan. That does not seem right because we should in fact be adding the field type. Let's see what happens if I run this. I can't imagine I just screwed something up by running. Let's see here. So maybe I did something silly with make migrations that I did not realize. Let's take a quick poke into pSQL to find out. I believe the database here is called either Pokemon or Pokédex DB, or let's look in settings py to find out. It is called Pokédex DB. So let's connect to that. And let's look at all the different tables. I'm interested in Pokemon app Pokemon. So let's see that table described. And type is there. So I must have done something silly on the command line and run most of the migrations at once, or ran the migrate command without realizing it and just got confused. So I apologize about that. But we see now that this type has been added. And what I want to do now is use the Python shell. And I want to use the Pokemon model, so I do have to import from the Pokédex app.models. And that's probably because I got this name wrong. And let's try this one more time and actually get this right. And I probably need the S after models because it's supposed to be plural. So now, right, when I'm using the Django shell, I can use all of my Django code, but I do have to import the stuff I want to use because it's not loaded into the shell by default. But now I've got my Pokemon model, right? This is the whole class. If I want to get a specific Pokemon, I can query the database, and Django wraps this up in an object called a query set. And this is a list of all the Pokemon. I can use this nice querying function to query the database just for the first Pokemon in that list. So let's just do Poke equals Pokemon objects first. And now I've got my Pokemon name and it's Pikachu. Pikachu has a type. I think this is from me messing around with this database yesterday. In fact, I know it is because it really should be normal by default. And in fact, if I kind of go back up a bit to Pokemon objects, let's look at the first one, right? We're getting that query set of everything. And let's find a non-Charmander. So if I look at Charmander's type, Charmander's normal, right? Because the default value for that model field was normal. So when we added that type as a column to the Pokemon table, all of the Pokemon in there got a setting of normal. And Pikachu has a type of ghost because I was messing around with this yesterday and making doing this same thing and actually saving the changes. But where I want to go with this is let's set the Pokemon type to something we know is going to fail. And let's call full clean. And indeed, we get a validation error, which is exactly what we want. And we see our error message. Let's set the type to something else. It's probably like Pokemon Heresy for Pikachu to be of the bug type. I might guess, but that's okay. Now let's try full clean and see if it passes validation. Awesome. And now I'm going to go ahead and save this. And now that data is actually saved in the database. Right. And I just updated this Pokemon, this Pikachu's type to bug. So that's how we can use Django console to basically kind of do little tiny unit tests as we go along, which is really nice because now when I move on to adding my URLs and routes, if I do run into an error, I know it's probably not with the model because I actually just tested out the changes to my model file. So I just want to pause and check in and see if folks have any questions. Cool. So let's take this home. The one other thing I want to also do with my Pokemon is update its serializer, which is what we're using in our API view for our Pokemon that sends all this stuff back when someone makes an API request to our API about a Pokemon, right? And we have to list the fields we send back here. It's got ID, name, level, and moves. And so right now, let me go ahead and exit the shell and run our server. Right now, if I want to get information about all of our Pokemon, note that we get the list of all the Pokemon, but there's no type. And to reiterate, the reason for that is our Pokemon API views use the Pokemon serializer over here and over here. And the Pokemon serializer looks at this fields attribute on this sort of meta class that we add there to see what fields from the model we care about. And this gives us a lot of control, right, over what we want to send back to our client, but we actually do want to send back type. So I am going to add that. The server restarts. And now we've got our Pokemon types. So now we've just done a pretty much end-to-end feature add, which is pretty cool. And now really we can start messing around with our React front-end code, because now we can write some React code to hit our noun project, our noun API endpoint to get an icon for a Pokemon type. And kind of before diving into that next step, I realized that we're almost at time here. I apologize. I went a bit long. I think we're going to be able to move through the most important pieces of the front-end code pretty swiftly. I just want to pause and check in to see if folks have any questions around sort of what we just implemented here on the back end before we switch gears into the front end. Cool. So I'm going to go ahead and split the terminal and move into the front end directory. And I'm going to, first of all, I should have everything installed. And I'm going to run our dev server. And something is not happy here. I remember running into this yesterday. Short answer, every now and then, if you get some sort of weird error that you're unsure of, I just deleted all my node modules and I'm going to run npm install to install everything again. And now let's try it. And this is from me like copying and moving the entire project around because I ran into this yesterday as well. So you all probably will not have to deal with this. But let's go ahead and make sure that our front end app is up and running. And we've got our homepage and we've got Pokemon. So really, our goal now is, I haven't really built out a lot of individual Pokemon stuff. So I may sort of squeeze it in here, but we're going to look at a Pokemon's type, and based on its type, we're going to make an API call, and we're going to look at an icon for it from the noun project. So let me go ahead and close out all of the Python code. And in fact, let's just call this front end tasks, right? And like, let's just say like, let's get our prototype going. And for that, just call API v1 noun and show the icon on the screen. Let's just get that working end to end. And then for our MVP, let's say we want to, we're going to have to do a little work here because we are going to have to modify the endpoint. To accept a type argument, right? It's going to have to look something like this. But we've actually done this several times already, so that this will actually be relatively straightforward. And then for each Pokemon, get its type, hit our endpoint to get an icon, and then render it. So I am probably going to skip over a little bit of like the individual Pokemon views to get to the most valuable stuff, but this will get us halfway there. And I think seeing this process will be useful. So I apologize, we might run 10 minutes long. I have a couple meetings I have to do after lunch, so I can come back around like, I want to say 2 or 3 in the afternoon is the other option. If folks are okay with it, what I was proposed is let's go for 10 more minutes. And then if we want to, we can reconvene in the afternoon. How does that sound to people? Okay, awesome. And thank you for your forbearance. So we haven't looked at our front end code in a bit. So let's start kind of poking around there and refreshing ourselves. I've got a really simple router. Really, all I did was make a home page and a Pokemon page. And the Pokemon page just lists all the Pokemon. So this is where I'm going to do most of the work. Because I already have this here. I already have this up and running. And again, for prototyping purposes, I'm probably going to keep a good amount of this work just in one spot. And then later, maybe I would move it into separate files. So, though actually, I think what I will do is the part that just like gets the stuff from our noun API, that can be put, I think, in its own component relatively easily. And I'll call that Pokemon item, sort of in line with the curriculum for today. And let me go ahead actually, and we're probably going to want use state and Axios. And in fact, I'll just import all these things. And then if I don't need them later, I'll delete them. And I'm going to move a little swiftly through the setup stages here, just to get this ball rolling. And basically, I'm just going to stick an H1 in here. And that's my placeholder, right? Eventually, we're going to put stuff in here. So what do I need to do? I need to hit the API v1 nouns endpoint. What do I need to do that? Well, I need to make an Axios call with use effect, because that is the React way. And then I will need some React component state to store the Axios responsive. Right, so these are sort of my steps here. I'm going to start with this one because I think this is by far the easiest, and we've sort of seen this pattern, right, where we can do a use effect, and we're going to pass in a function to it, and we're going to add the open and close brackets so that the use effect doesn't go on forever. And inside here, we're going to actually make the call to I don't know why it jumps to get selection, but we're actually going to make this function call to get our icon asset from our API endpoint. And this is what's going to be our asynchronous function. Remember, and I'll sort of map this skeleton out and then build it up as we go. Where I need to do something like let response equals Axios, dot get, and this needs to be let. And so because we're making an HTTP request and we don't know how long it's going to take, we need to tell JavaScript that like you need to pay attention to when this comes back. I didn't talk about it that much, but the Python requests library, if you all noted, we didn't have to do anything like this with async and await. And that's because the way Python works, like HTTP requests are blocking operations. Just sort of the way the Python language works, if you like send an HTTP request on line 7 of your Python code, the Python runtime is going to wait for that response to come back before moving on to line 8, unless you like set a timeout in advance. And JavaScript doesn't work that way. JavaScript will just keep going, which is why we have to do this async await stuff, so that JavaScript can know, hey, I need to keep track of this so I can come back to it and actually get this response. So we need to tell JavaScript that this is an asynchronous function, and it would help if I put that in the right spot, which is at the beginning of the function declaration. And I need to tell JavaScript where in my function call the asynchronous bit is. And we are going to hit our own endpoint here. And actually, I want this to be a template literal. And at some point, we could even put this whole HTTP 170018000 in like a constants file somewhere. So I'm not constantly retyping it, but that's sort of a icing on the cake. And we're going to do API v1 now. Now, what we want to do, but haven't implemented yet, is be able to pass in a type. Just for now, in the interest of time, I'm just going to get this working as is. Just so we're going to be getting the same thing back for everything, but we will at least have everything working and hooked up. And we'll add a .catch to handle our errors, and we'll just console log the error. And that's pretty much all we need. And I think I do want to console log response.data. And I'll worry about hooking up the React component state in a minute. And I'll worry about dealing with, we're not really using the Pokemon yet. You know, this is, I'll add a to-do over here, to-do. Make API call specifically for Pokemon.type. So there's a couple other pieces to add here, right? But this is actually enough code that I can use this component and make sure that my HTTP AJAX call is working. And I think what I'm going to do, though it will be kind of messy. Oh, there is actually one piece that I kind of, no, that's okay. We can get this far. We can get and kind of come back to the rest of it later. Is I think I will just add it's a little messy, but I think I will add maybe inside this list item all the stuff that I want, and just to keep things, yeah, it'll be a little messy, but we can at least see it kind of working. And I think I'm just going to do Pokemon item, and we'll pass in the Pokemon in question. And I might get a complaint about this. I might need to shift this to a div. React might not like me sort of shoehorning this inside a list item, but we'll see how this goes. And we're going to import Pokemon item from components Pokemon item. And so the first thing is to kill and restart the dev server and see if it throws any errors or complaints. And indeed, it does not like this list item stuff. The list item is really supposed to have text inside of it. I think what I'm going to do for simplicity is change all this list item stuff to divs, which are a lot more flexible. And then this can just become a div for now. And this also becomes a div. And we still probably want that key. But now inside this div, I can just add a paragraph tag and put the Pokemon name. And put the Pokemon item on the next line. And now I can close out the div. And let's see. Oh, that of course, that would be the other issue. So this gives us a little more flexibility anyway using these divs. Let's see how we do in terms of our dev server. So the dev server, Our front end dev server seems happy. We can pretty much ignore all the server side stuff. And in fact, I can see Squirtle, Pikachu, Charmander. And what I can also do is clear the network tab. Go ahead and do a hard refresh. And I should see, and I do see, a whole bunch of API calls to my noun endpoint. And I get this response back. And this is what I want. We haven't done anything with this, but remember, every time that Pokemon item component loads, it makes that HTTP request to our own endpoint. So I know this part is working. I know my React code is correctly making the request and getting data back. And now I can hook it up to actually start doing something with that data. And I think we can do that in the next minute or two, and then that's probably a good time to wrap. And I just want to pause actually and see if folks have any questions.
Could you go back to your Pokemon item? Yeah. So I'm just curious on line 5, why are you passing Pokemon
Yeah,
in the curly brackets?
it's a great question. What we want to do, but cannot do yet, and I don't want the $sign there, I think. Oh no, I do. I'm getting confused between syntax. We would have to modify our backend Django code. We'd have to modify that path, that route, right, to accept to a type after noun. And then we would have to modify the request that makes to the noun project API to not like make a hard-coded request, which we can actually do relatively quickly, probably in about the same amount of time it takes me to talk about it, to be totally honest. Because if we go here to API app and we go to URLs py, I'll just close all this stuff out. And we add in here something like this. String type. And now if I go to the view for the API app, this get method needs to now accept an argument type. And down here, where we have this endpoint, we have hard-coded the icon that we're getting. But if I hop over to the noun project API Explorer, searching for a Pokemon of the rock type, we can see how they want us to do that with a query parameter that comes after this question mark, right? And everything after the question mark is called a query param. So I can really easily make this modification and turn this into an F string. And it is indeed icon question mark query equals type. And now I've actually just made that backend modification to my code. This part is actually going to complain because we might get a whole bunch of things back and not just one icon, which I know from experimenting with this the other day. So we can't necessarily rely on the shape of our JSON looking like that. So I'm just going to make that modification now. But now we can hit this endpoint, and we can actually test this out very quickly. If I hop over to, instead of all Pokemon, right, we want noun, which should now fail. But now, if I do rock, it works because we've updated our path in Django and we've updated the query that we send to the noun API. And as you can see, icons is now an array. So it's a whole bunch of stuff. So we can kind of cross that bridge of how to deal with that in a minute. But now this endpoint suddenly becomes much more useful, right? And it's not anything we haven't seen before. You all have done this several times. We're just doing this with a third-party API now. And so now actually that we've implemented this, now all of a sudden this can get more interesting. Right? And actually I can go ahead and in my front-end code, if I dig up the correct tab where I have that hiding, which would be over here, I can clear this. I can do a hard refresh. I can look at those same requests. And I kind of knew what to look for. You can also, if you hit, I believe it's this, gets rid of a bunch of other stuff. You can kind of filter the HTTP requests. And we can see these are all the requests that Pokemon item makes for each Pokemon to the noun type, because we have a bunch of normal Pokemon except for our one bug. And now the noun API is sending back all these different icons, and we've got data.icons, and we probably just want to grab the first thing from there. And somewhere in there is going to be the icon link. There's a thumbnail description. There's a permalink. Lord knows. It looks like it's the first icon, and maybe inside. As long as we're looking at this, we might as well find the specific link that we want and take it home. So there's thumbnail URL. There's got to be some other URL. I'm just seeing the thumbnail URL. I must be missing something. But I'll just use the thumbnail URL for now, because that gives us an image as well. And we can grab that, and we can, if I grab, in fact, only the parts we care about, we can see that's the image that it gets us. So in fact, this is where this can be really helpful. So to reiterate, I've got response.data.icons, and then I'm just going to grab the first icon and then just grab the thumbnail URL. So let's just console log response.data.icons and grab the first one and grab the thumbnail URL. And let's see if that prints to the screen, if I got that correct. That's actually helpful. So it does look like I got something wrong here. So let's step back a bit and just console log response.data.icons. And it's still undefined. So let me look at, I see. There might be, I think I have two datas is what has happened. I think I have response.data.data. Let's see what happens, because Axios put stuff in a response.data and I added it as well, which may actually have been a mistake. Yeah, and I have, this is a common issue of like crazy nesting in JSON API responses, which is why I kind of knew that was a go-to. So I may have goofed in having this here, and we maybe could remove it if we want. Now let's try .icons and see about getting the first one. And now we're getting closer to what we want, and let's just grab that thumbnail URL. And this is why the DevTools console really is your friend with front-end work. And now we've got a bunch of URLs, and now we can actually do something interesting with this. And thank you all for sticking around, because I know I went over 10 minutes. But I think you all kind of see where this is going, which is we're going to just, I'm just going to call this image URL, set image URL equals use state, and we're going to have it be null. Yes, what's up?
I think there's a hot mic.
Oh, cool. And I'm just doing this extra step for my own, like I like to be able to console log stuff easily. So now I can console log. Now we can update our state. And now, in fact, like instead of this H1, let's do, what is it? An image tag and source equals image URL. And we can just close that out. And what I will do is, if there is no image URL, so I'm adding a guard statement here. So this is slightly different from the ternary approach that we've seen, but it's going to do the exact same thing. I just don't want to try and show an image when that URL doesn't exist. So there's both of these are valid approaches, the ternary approach or sort of the guard statement. They each have their own trade-offs. Let's see if I have an issue with my front-end code, because I do notice the front-end dev tools here freaking out a little bit. And indeed, it looks like it's complaining about a missing semicolon, which is good advice. Though the semicolon, it's not quite optional with JavaScript these days, but it's got in there. And this is just because that is a holdover from my console log. And now let's see. Oh, and I probably want to do constant. And now I think my front-end dev server should run and the code should compile fine. And in fact, we have a little bit of a preview here of our images. So I thank you for sticking around for a while. I realize I ran a bit long and we got a little hacky with the front-end code there, but you also got to see that was pretty much the shortest version of the happy path that there is, right? At this point, you can add on, you can make the code better architected, but we made it work. And now you can make it right and make it better, to kind of borrow the old saying. So we should wrap up. I just want to check in and see if folks have any questions or things that we could quickly review at before we wrap. So I'm happy to take a minute or two to go over stuff. That said, obviously, for those of you that want to go to lunch, please feel more than free. Thank you for sticking around a bit longer. And yeah, what's on people's minds?
I just had a question on using this nouns API as opposed to the Pokemon API. I assume it's because you wanted us to get practice using the API keys.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like if the third-party Pokemon API, what is it, Poke API? Yeah, because this one has images as well. It's exactly it. We just wanted practice with API keys, and with interacting with another third-party API. I don't know if this one has image assets for Pokemon types. It may or may not. Yeah, but really the goal here was we can get a bunch of nice images based on a word, and you get to practice working with a new API and using API keys. In particular, API keys, so you can see how to set up a .env file and do that properly, because that's really important. And a lot of APIs, you will have to do that.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. What else is on people's minds? Cool. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. So there's obviously a lot of room for refactoring and improvement here. Oh, props validation. That's some other thing. The fact that I've sort of crammed all this into the Pokemon page. Right. It's a little less than ideal. We can clean this up. We can make the image URL present more nicely. There's plenty to do to improve this code, but we actually did, to kind of go back to my notes file. We ended up doing our critical path item here for the front end stuff, right? Which was calling the noun API. we actually ended up doing the MVP as well, which is we actually modified that to take a string type. And you saw, though it might have felt a little new working with the third API, how easy that actually is. And now we've got, for each Pokemon, we've got an image associated with this type. So I will definitely be pushing this code to demos and notes. There is also a slightly more cleaned up version of this code in that Pokédex directory in today's lesson. And thank you for sticking around, everyone, and have an awesome lunch. Let me go ahead and stop our recording.